Part 2: Theory of Architecture Audio Recording Reviewer. Proxemics. It is the study of the symbolic and communicative role of the spatial separation individuals maintain. Privacy. The ability of individuals or groups to control their visual, auditory, and olfactory interactions with others. Solitude. A state of being free from the observation of others. Reserve. A state in which person employs psychological barriers to control unwanted intrusions. Anonymity. State of being unknown even in a crowd. Crowding. A stressful state limiting personal autonomy and expression, breaking down desired communications. Social overload. Crowded conditions lead to negative behaviors because they are related casually. Personal space. The distance that animals of the same non-contact species maintain among themselves except for the most intimate interactions. Personalization. It is the making of places or the creation of objects with them as a symbol of staking with space. Personalized space. An area of the natural or built environment marked as territory. Territoriality. A territory is a limited space that a person or a group uses and defends as an exclusive reserve. Gendered architecture. Vertical. Masculine, celestial, divine. Horizontal. Feminine, earth, sea. Straight line, man. Curved line, women. Environment behavior studies. Includes the systematic examination of relationships between the environment and human behavior and their application in the design process. Spirit in architecture. Represents the conduct, belief, and cognition of preparations or perceptions by a group of people regarding how they live. Architecture in prehistoric times. Before recorded history, human constructed stones, circles, megaliths, and other structures. Ancient Egypt. Powerful rulers constructed monumental pyramids, temples, and the shrines. Classical. From the rise of ancient Greece until the fall of the Roman Empire, great buildings were constructed according to the precise rules. Early Christian Medieval. European architecture moved from the rectangular basilica forms to the classically inspired Byzantine style. Romanesque. As Rome spread across Europe, heavier, stocky architecture with rounded arches emerged. Gothic architecture. Innovative builders created the great cathedrals of Europe. Renaissance architecture. A return to classical ideas ushered an age of awakening in Italy, France, and England. Baroque architecture is reflected in opulent and dramatic churches with irregular shapes and extravagant ornamentation. Rococo architecture. During the last phase of the Baroque period, builders constructed gracefully white buildings with sweeping curves. American colonial architecture. European settlers in the New World borrowed ideas from their homelands to create their own breed of architecture. Georgian architecture was a stately symmetrically style that dominated in Great Britain and Ireland and influenced building styles in the American colonies. Greek Revival architecture. These classical buildings and homes often feature columns, pediments, and other details inspired by Greek forms. Neoclassical Federalist Idealist. A renewed interest in ideas of Renaissance architect Andrea Palladio inspired a return of classical shapes in Europe, Great Britain, and the United States. Arts and crafts movement in architecture was a late 19th century backlash against the forces of industrialization revived an interest in handcrafts and sought a spiritual connection with surrounding environment, both natural and man-made. Victorian architecture. Industrialization brought many innovations in architecture. The style includes Gothic Revival, Italianistic, East Lake Queen Anne Romanesque and Second Empire. Box Arts architecture, also known as academic classicism or classical revival, characterized by order, symmetry, formal design, grandiosity, and elaborate ornamentation. Art Nouveau architecture, known as the New Style, was first expressed in fabrics and graphic design. Buildings often has asymmetrical shapes, arches, and decorative surfaces with curved plant-like designs. Art Deco architecture, zigzag patterns and vertical lines create dramatic effects on Jazz Age buildings. Neo-Gothic architecture. In early 20th century, medieval Gothic ideas were applied to modern skyscrapers. 20th century trends in architecture includes Art Moderne and Bauhaus school coined by Walter Gropius, Deconstructivism, Formalism, Modernism, Structuralism, and Postmodernism. Bauhaus. Gropius was its founder, who would rather close shop than be dictated by the German ruler. Art Nouveau. It is an ornament of undulating waves, flowers, and flower stalks developed in France and Belgium towards the end of 19th century. Brutalism. It refers to the works of Van der Rohe, which displayed the use of glass and steel, display of service systems of a building like air conditioning ducts, plumbing pipes, etc. Siam or International Modernism. It was set by Le Corbusier and S. Gideon, referring to the mode of architecture worldwide. Cubic, white surface, flat roof, and set on end landscape. ISMS in architecture. The constructivism, a style ignoring the classic approach design introduced in the early 60s in Europe. The functionalism. Japan introduced this approach to design, disregarding functionalism that have failed in many instances. Constructivism. It is a passionate pleading for ideas on form and space in architecture. Eclecticism. It is applied to any building incorporating a mixture of past styles. Expressionism. It is a term describing the works of architects who figured in the international and functionalist period of the modern government. Futurism. It is an architecture of calculation of audacity and simplicity. An architecture of reinforced concrete, iron glass, and substitute for stone, wood, bricks which make possible maximum elasticity and lightness. Monumentalism. It is based on the notion that the form of the object should last, and implicitly, there are forms which have externally validity. Metabolism. It was initiated by the World Design Conference in Tokyo, 1960, by the Japanese, which concentrated on the order of relationships between man and environment. National Romanticism is a style fed on particular historical motifs and devices as well as the associative aspects of the great historical periods of architecture. Post-metabolism. Interest in explaining things as the nature of the house in the city and are concerned with intricate designs on small houses and potential schemes. Neoplasticism. It relates to the theory of pure plastic art, consists of exclusive use of the right angle in his horizontal position and the use of three primary colors, contrasted with or incorporating in various canvases the three non-colors white, gray, and black. Organism. A building must grow or blend with the environment. Radicalism. is a radical shift in emphasis from buildings of the past to designs of those which met the demands of modern life. Structuralism refers to iron construction initiated by Joseph Paxton in the Crystal Palace. Utilitarianism refers to low-cost housing. This was set at a time when search for economic solutions for low-value sites were considered in England. Postmodernism. It is an alternate to the modern movement ideas like revivals of patterned book principle of the 19th century. Let's proceed to the needs of man. Physical needs. Essentials without which life could not be sustained. Self-preservation, food, shelter, clothing, and reproduction. Emotional needs. Essentials but they must be present in some form if man is to secure spiritual as well as physical comfort, aesthetics, religion, and recreation. Intellectual needs. Non-essentials but they must be represent or present in some form in some form if man is to secure spiritual as well as physical comfort, education, science, and government. Stimuli to action. Forces which must be satisfied in life is to exist in civilization to develop. Desire for preservation. Most fundamental and causes man to provide shelter and comfort and to appease hunger and thirst. Desire for recognition. Pride and ambition, personal or civic, result in the struggle for position. Desire for response arises from gregarious nature of man, wish for love, friendship, and sociability. Desire for self-expression. Urge of man to assert himself as an individual, to do things his own particular way. Let's proceed to resulting manifestations. Response. In seeking the companionship of his fellow creatures, man congregates. Self-expression. Man has developed creative endeavor. Color. A phenomenon of light and visual perception that may be described in terms of an individual's perception of hue, saturation, and lightness for objects, and hue, saturation, and brightness for light sources. Deep. Designating a color having low lightness and strong saturation. Dark. Designating a color having low lightness and low saturation and reflecting only a small fraction of incident light. Pale. A color having a high lightness and low saturation. Hue. The property of light by which the color of an object is classified as being red, yellow, green, or blue. Saturation. One of the three dimensions of color, the purity of vividness of a hue, also called intensity. Chroma. The degree by which color differs from a gray of the same lightness or brightness, corresponding to saturation of the perceived color. Value. The degree by which color appears to reflect more or less of the incident light, corresponding to lightness of the perceived color. Grayscale. Scale of chromatic colors having several, usually 10, equal gradations ranging from white to black. Brightness. The dimension of color that is correlated with luminance and by which visual stimuli are ordered continuously from very dim to very bright. Lightness. The dimension of color which an object appears to reflect more or less of the incident light, varying from black to white for surface colors and from black to colorless for transparent volume colors. Subtractive color. A color produced by mixing cyan, yellow, and magenta pigments, each of which absorbs certain wavelengths. Selective colors. The absorption of certain wavelengths of the light incident on a colored surface, the remaining portion being reflected or transmitted. Additive color, a color produced by combining lights of red, green, and blue wavelengths. This light contains all the wavelengths necessary to produce a colorless or white light. Reflected color, the perceived color of an object determined by the wavelengths of the light reflected from its surface after selective absorption of other wavelengths of the incident light. Spectrum, the distribution of energy by radiant source arranged in order of wavelengths, especially the band of colors produced when the sunlight is refracted. Munsell system, a system for specifying a range in three orderly scales of uniform visual steps according to the hue, chroma, and value. Optical mixing, the merging of juxtaposed dots or strokes of pure colors when seen from a distance to produce a hue, often more luminous than that available from premixed pigment. Monochromatic, having only one color or exhibiting varying intensities and values of single hue. Polychromatic, having or exhibiting a variety of colors. Achromatic, having no saturation and therefore no hue such as white, black, or gray. Tint, a relatively light value of a color produced by adding white to it. Shade, a relatively dark value of color produced by adding black to it. Tone, an intermediate value of color between tint and the shade. Gray, an achromatic color between white and black. Triad, a combination of three colors forming an equilateral triangle on a color wheel. Split, a combination of one color and a pair of colors adjoining its complementary color on a color wheel. Double, a combination of two analogous colors and their complementary colors on a color wheel. Complementary, one of a pair opposing colors on a color wheel perceived as completing or enhancing each other. Warm, designating a color inclined toward or dominated by red, orange, or yellow. Cool, designating a color inclined toward or dominated green, blue, or violet. Advancing color, a warm color that appears to move toward an observer and giving an illusion space. Receding color, a color that appears to move away from an observer, giving an illusion of space. Color scheme, an arrangement of pattern of colors conceived of as a forming an integrated whole. Color wheel, a circular scale of the colors of the spectrum showing complementary colors opposite each other. Repose, harmony in the arrangement of parts or colors that is restful to the eye. Juxtaposition, the state or position of being placed close together or side by side, so as to permit comparison or contrast. Contradiction, the state or condition of being opposed, inconsistent, or logically incongruous. Opposition, the state of position of being placed opposite another. Contrast, opposition or juxtaposition of dissimilar elements in a work of art to intensify each element. Salient, prominent or conspicuous. Counterpoint, a parallel but contrasting element or theme in a narrative or concept. Chaos, a state of utter disorder or confusion. Anomaly, a deviation from the normal or expected form, order, or arrangement. Balance, the pleasing or harmonious arrangement or proportion of parts or elements in a design or composition. Symmetry, the exact correspondence in size, form, and arrangement of parts on opposite sides of a dividing line or plane or about a center axis. Equilibrium, a state of rest or balance between contrasting elements or opposing forces. Concentration, a series of linked or interconnected things or events. Movement, a rhythmic quality of composition suggesting motion by represented gestures or by the relationship or structural elements. Gradation, a process or change taking place by degrees or through a series of gradual successive stages. Interval, a space between two objects, points, or states. Eurythmy, harmony of proportion or movement. Proportion, the comparative proper or harmonious relation of one part to another or to the whole with respect to magnitude, quantity, or degree. Visual scale, size or proportion an element appears to have relative to other elements, components of known or assumed size. Human scale, size or proportion of a building element or space or an article of furniture. Proxemics, study of the symbolic and communicative role of the spatial separation individuals maintains in various social and interpersonal situations. Haptic, relating to or based on the sense of touch. Kinesthesia, the sensory experience of bodily position, presence, or movement derived chiefly from stimulation of nerve endings in muscles, tendons, and joints.